On the early morning of May 8, 1942, the aircraft carrier USS Lexington was bracing for another fierce day of fighting in the Coral Sea. With a large Japanese task force in the area, fighting in the Coral Sea had started as early as May 4th. The area quickly erupted in a furious battle for naval supremacy. The Battle of the Coral Sea, as it would later be called, would mark the first time in naval history that two navies would fight with each other without ever reaching visual range. By the end of the day, Lexington would be a smoldering wreck, being fatally damaged by Japanese aircraft. This is the story of the USS Lexington and how her sacrifice helped deny the Japanese a vital foothold in the region. Lexington was the fourth U.S. Navy ship named after the Battle of Lexington, the first battle of the Revolutionary War. Originally being authorized in 1916 as a Lexington-class battlecruiser, her construction was delayed, and after a redesign, she was laid down on January 8, 1921, by Fore River Shipbuilding Company in Quincy, Massachusetts. The Washington Naval Treaty, established in 1922, halted the ship's original design and construction as a battlecruiser, so the hull was redesigned and reauthorized once again as she was reclassified as an aircraft carrier on July 1, 1922. The ship had an overall length of 888 feet, a beam of 106 feet, and a draft of 30 feet and 5 inches at deep load. Lexington had a standard displacement of 36,000 tons and a deep lay displacement of 43,000 tons, being launched on October 3, 1925. She was commissioned on December 14, 1927, and by 1942, the crew consisted of some 100 officers and 1,800 enlisted men. The waterline belt of the Lexington varied from 5 to 6 inches and covered the middle 530 feet of the ship. The belt had a height of 9 feet 4 inches. The magazine was protected by 2 layers of special treatment steel totaling 2 inches in thickness. The carrier was powered using turboelectric propulsion. Each of the 4 propeller shafts was driven by 2 22,500 horsepower electric motors. The motors were powered by 4 General Electric turbo generators using steam provided by 16 Yarrow boilers. This gave her a max speed of 33 knots and a max range of 10,000 nautical miles at 10 knots. Armament originally consisted of 4 twin-mount 8-inch guns placed on the starboard side of the deck, and a dozen 5-inch 127mm dual-purpose guns along the sides of her hull. However, in March of 1942, her 8-inch guns were removed and repurposed as coastal batteries, and replaced by new anti-aircraft guns consisting of 17 5-inch guns in a single mount along the deck, 12 quad 1.1-inch guns, and 22 20mm cannons, creating a formidable barrage against aircraft. Originally designed to carry 78 aircraft, by 1942, her carrier complement consisted of Grumman F-4F Wildcats, Douglas SBD Dauntless dive bombers, and Douglas TBD Devastator torpedo bombers. By the start of the war, Lexington had become a formidable ship in the Pacific, boasting heavy armor, a long range, and a large assessment of fighter and bomber aircraft. At the start of the Second World War in the Pacific, on December 7, 1941, Task Force 12, including Lexington, 3 heavy cruisers, and 5 destroyers, were ferrying Marine Corps dive bombers to reinforce the base on Midway Island. On the morning of December 7th, the task force was located some 500 nautical miles southeast of Midway when receiving news of the Japanese attack. By midday, Rear Admiral John H. Newton, commander of the task force, received orders to cancel the ferry mission and to search for Japanese ships in conjunction with Vice Admiral Wilson Brown's ships. Lexington launched several combat air patrols and scout planes throughout the day, searching for Japanese ships between Johnson Island and Hawaii. After responding to several false alarms, she was forced to return to Pearl Harbor on December 13th to refuel and rearm. Her rearm consisted of 21 Brewster Buffalo fighters, 32 SBD Dauntless dive bombers, and 15 TBD Devastator torpedo bombers. Steaming out of Pearl Harbor the next day, now redesignated to Task Force 11 with 4 destroyer supports, she was sent to raid the Japanese base on Juliet in the Marshall Islands to distract the Japanese from the Wake Island Relief Force led by USS Saratoga. However, the raid was canceled on December 20th, and the task force was ordered northwest to cover the relief of Wake Island. The Japanese would capture Wake Island on December 23rd before either task force could arrive, and fearing destruction of the carriers, both task forces were ordered to return to Pearl Harbor. Lexington's first notable engagement will come in March of 1942, when American intelligence indicated Japanese warships gathering at Lae and Salomel on New Guinea's northeast coast. On the morning of March 10th, Lexington launched a total of 52 attack planes against a flotilla of 16 Japanese ships, sinking 3 transports and damaging several other ships in the process. One Dauntless dive bomber was shot down by anti-aircraft, with the rest returning to Lexington. Weather closed in during the afternoon, ending the day's action with little damage done to the Lexington. Task Force 11 was then ordered back to Pearl Harbor, arriving on March 26th. After arriving at Pearl Harbor, she was given a short refit before Rear Admiral Aubrey Fitch assumed command of Task Force 11 on April 1st, being reorganized to consist of Lexington and the heavy battle cruisers Minneapolis and New Orleans, as well as 7 destroyers. After briefly ferrying a Marine squadron to Palomar Atoll, she was ordered to train with Task Force 1, awaiting further instruction. On April 18th, Allied codebreakers intercepted Japanese messages indicating the Japanese intent to invade and occupy Port Moresby and Tulagi in the southeastern Solomon Islands, going by the code name Operation Mo. Task Force 11 would rendezvous with Task Force 17 on May 1st, refuel, and steam toward the Coral Sea with the USS Yorktown. Lexington now carried an air group consisting of 21 Wildcat fighters, 37 Dauntless dive bombers, and 12 Devastator torpedo bombers. The Japanese opened Operation Mo by occupying Tulagi on May 3rd. Allied reconnaissance aircraft would spot the operation unfolding and alert the task force. Rear Admiral Fletcher ordered an attack on Japanese shipping the following day, alerting the Japanese to the presence of at least one American aircraft carrier, although they were unsure of its location. The Japanese would launch reconnaissance aircraft the following day to search for the Americans, but without finding them. On May 7th, Lexington would finally strike its first carrier target. In the early morning, American reconnaissance aircraft spotted 2 Japanese heavy cruisers off the eastern tip of New Guinea at 7:35 a.m. and 2 carriers at 8:15 a.m. An airstrike on the reported carriers was ordered, with Lexington and Yorktown launching a total of 53 Dauntlesses and 22 Devastators, escorted by 18 Wildcats. Although the original messages about carriers turned out to be false, the light carrier Shoho was soon spotted, escorting the invasion force for Port Moresby, only 30 miles away from the original reported location, and the aircraft were diverted to the new target. American dive and torpedo bombers quickly descended on the carrier, hitting her in quick succession with at least 7 bombs, setting the carrier ablaze. She would be finished off later that morning by planes from USS Yorktown, sinking below the waves at 11:31 a.m. Around the same time, the other 2 Japanese carriers in the area, the Shikaku and Zukaku, had just finished recovering a strike force ordered that a further airstrike be readied, as the American carriers were believed to have been located. The Japanese task force launched an attack wave later that afternoon, but were unable to locate the American position. On the morning of May 8, 1942, both sides spotted each other about the same time and began launching their aircraft around 9 a.m. This would be the first time in history that 2 opposing carrier forces would meet each other in battle. The Japanese carriers would be the first to launch their aircraft, launching 18 Zero fighters, 33 Itachi dive bombers, and 18 torpedo bombers. Yorktown was the first American carrier to launch her aircraft, with Lexington being launched 7 minutes later. Shikaku's flight deck would quickly be hit by 2 bombs from Yorktown, disabling her flight deck but not doing enough damage to sink her. Lexington's air group would land a further bomb on the crippled aircraft carrier, adding to the damage. The Japanese attack waves spotted the American carriers around 11:05 a.m. with their torpedo bombers attacking first. American aircraft shot down 4 torpedo bombers before they could drop their torpedoes, but 10 survived long enough to hit Lexington twice on port side at 11:20 a.m. The shock from the first torpedo hit at the bow, jamming both elevators in the up position and cracking a fuel tank, starting a small leak. The second torpedo hit her opposite side, rupturing the primary water main and flooding 3 boiler rooms. These explosions disabled half her engines and caused the carrier to list to a 6 to 7 degree angle to port, slowing her to 24 knots. Only 10 minutes later at 11:30 a.m., dive bombers dove in, hitting Lexington with 2 bombs, the first hitting the port forward 5-inch ammunition locker, killing the entire crew. The second struck the funnel, doing little structural damage but killing dozens of gun crews. Fuel was pumped from port storage tanks to the starboard side to correct the list, and Lexington began recovering aircraft again at 11:39 a.m. Disaster would strike at 12:47 when sparks ignited gasoline vapors, causing a massive explosion, killing 25 crewmen and knocking out the main damage control station. Luckily, the damage did not hamper flight operations, and planes continued to be launched and recovered despite the damage. Another explosion occurred at 2:42 p.m. that started fires in the hangar and blew the forward elevator 12 inches above the flight deck. 3 destroyers were sent to assist Lexington, but another large explosion at 3:25 knocked out water pressure in the hangar, and the forward machinery area had to be evacuated. Despite damage control crews' best efforts, the abandoned ship order was ordered at 5:07 p.m. An hour later, a final series of large explosions blew the aft elevator apart, throwing aircraft dozens of feet into the air. Some 2,770 officers and men were rescued by the rest of the task force by the day's end. The destroyer Phelps was then ordered to scuttle the ship to prevent her from being captured, firing 5 torpedoes. Lexington finally slipped under the waves as the last torpedo hit her. During the battle, Lexington would lose 216 crewmen killed or missing, along with another 17 SBD dive bombers, 12 TBD torpedo bombers, and 13 Wildcat fighters. By the end of the Battle of the Coral Sea, both sides had paid a heavy price in both ships and lives. The American losses included the sinking of the USS Lexington and damage sustained to the USS Yorktown. The Japanese had lost the light carrier Soho on May 7th, and the carrier Shikaku had been so heavily damaged on May 8th she would be out of operation for several months. The Japanese would claim a tactical victory, sinking 41,826 tons of Allied shipping versus 19,000 tons sunk by the Americans. Lexington represented at the time 25% of American carrier strength in the Pacific. The battle was won by the Americans from a strategic perspective, however, as it had averted the seaborne invasion of Port Moresby, decreasing the threat to supply lines between the United States and Australia, as the Japanese were forced to abandon the operation that had started the battle to begin with. Lexington's sacrifice, therefore, along with the Yorktown's assistance, stopped the Japanese advance towards Australia, giving the Allies the first success against the Japanese in the war. The actions that day would also provide vital for the upcoming Battle of Midway, as both the Japanese carrier Shikaku and Zukaku would be absent due to heavy damage sustained during the fighting. In June 1942, shortly after the sinking was made public, workers at the Quincy shipyard, where the ship had been built, cabled Navy Secretary Frank Knox and proposed a change in the name of one of the Essex-class carriers under construction. Knox agreed to the proposal, and on June 16, 1942, the 7th Essex-class carrier under construction would be renamed from Cabot to Lexington in her honor. Please like and subscribe if you enjoyed stories on military history. Also, please tell me in the comments what World War II ship you would like to learn about next. Thanks for watching.